Ethan had no idea that a seemingly ordinary day would spiral into a life-altering whirlwind of events. It began with a simple choice: stay on schedule to deliver newspapers or help a frail old man struggling under the weight of heavy wooden planks. That single moment of hesitation carried the weight of his future. If he stopped, he risked angering his boss and losing the little income his family relied on. But if he kept going, how could he ignore someone in need? What Ethan couldn't have known was that this split-second decision would spark a chain reaction, pulling him into a world of challenges, self-doubt, and opportunities he never imagined. A world where the line between triumph and failure was as thin as the paper he delivered each morning. Before we dive into this gripping story of kindness, challenges, and transformation, comment below with the place you're watching from today. And if this story inspires you as much as we think it will, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss what's next. Ethan's life wasn't like other teenagers his age. While others enjoyed carefree days, he woke up before the sun had risen to help support his family. His mornings were always the same: a quiet house filled with the faint hum of his mother Sophia's soft singing from the kitchen and the occasional giggles of his little sister Lily. On this particular day, Ethan adjusted the stack of newspapers on the rack of his old bicycle. The bike was far from perfect. The paint was chipped, the tires squeaked, and the handlebars were patched with tape. Yet, it was reliable enough to help him do what he needed: deliver papers to the small, dusty neighborhood where they lived. Sophia appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and affection. Her faded apron hinted at a morning already filled with work. "Ethan," she called softly, "don't forget to eat something before you go. I left bread on the table." He nodded, offering a small smile, though he wasn't hungry. "Thanks, Mom," he replied, glancing toward the table, but knowing he'd probably skip breakfast. There was too much to do, and he couldn't afford to be late. His little sister Lily peeked out from behind Sophia, her wide eyes full of admiration. "Ethan, will you be home early today?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. "Maybe," he teased, leaning down to ruffle her curly hair. "You'd better behave for Mom while I'm gone." The streets Ethan pedaled through were eerily quiet in the early hours, save for the occasional bark of a stray dog or the distant clatter of shutters opening. The neighborhood wasn't much: rows of small, weathered homes with peeling paint and yards cluttered with makeshift repairs. It was a place of survival, not comfort. Ethan's route was always the same, and he could do it blindfolded if he needed to. The papers weren't just a stack of news. They were a lifeline for his family. Each coin he earned from deliveries helped keep food on their table and a roof over their heads. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going. As the bike tires crunched along the dirt roads, Ethan allowed his mind to wander. He thought about school, which he attended when he could, though his attendance was sporadic. He thought about Lily's future and how he wanted something better for her. Most of all, he thought about his mom, Sophia, who worked tirelessly cleaning homes in the better-off parts of town. The sun had just started to rise, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, when Ethan turned onto the next street. That's when he saw something that made him slow down, squinting to make sure he wasn't imagining it. An elderly man, hunched and frail, was struggling to lift a large plank of wood from a pile that had fallen across his yard. The man's movements were slow, and his hands shook as he tried to lift it. Ethan could see the pain in the man's posture, the way his back arched awkwardly under the strain. Ethan frowned, his grip tightening on the handlebars of his bike. "Should I stop?" he muttered under his breath. His schedule was tight, and any delay would mean he'd have to pedal twice as fast to finish his route. Yet, something about the man's struggle tugged at him. He sighed deeply, muttering, "Dang it," under his breath before veering his bike toward the house. Propping it against a leaning wooden fence, he called out, "Hey, mister! Need some help?" The old man, startled, looked up. His face was deeply lined with wrinkles, his eyes tired but kind. He blinked as if he couldn't quite believe someone was talking to him. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "I could use a hand, young man," he said, his voice rough but grateful. "These old bones aren't what they used to be." Ethan nodded, stepping forward without hesitation. Gripping the other end of the plank, He was surprised by how heavy it felt. His arms strained, but he adjusted his stance and grinned through the effort. "Lift with your knees," he advised, half joking, as they moved the plank inch by inch to the side of the yard. When it was finally done, the old man, Mr. Harris, as he introduced himself, leaned back against a post, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're a strong kid," Mr. Harris said with a faint smile. "Thank you for this. Not many people would stop." Ethan shrugged, feeling slightly embarrassed. "It's no big deal," he mumbled. "You looked like you were about to hurt yourself." But Mr. Harris's gratitude ran deeper than Ethan could imagine. As they moved the remaining planks together, the old man gave small instructions, which Ethan followed diligently. The work left Ethan's arms trembling and his shirt damp with sweat, but it also left him with an odd sense of satisfaction. When the last plank was stacked neatly against the half-built wall, Mr. Harris let out a long sigh of relief. "I can't thank you enough, boy. You've got a good heart. What's your name?" "Ethan," he replied simply, brushing dirt from his jeans. "Well, Ethan," Mr. Harris said, his voice filled with a sincerity that made Ethan pause, "if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. You've helped an old man more than you know." Ethan smiled faintly, picking up his bike and preparing to leave. "Take care, Mr. Harris," he said, pedaling off. As he rode down the street, he couldn't help but feel lighter, as if the weight of the day's responsibilities had been eased ever so slightly by the act of helping someone else. The morning light filtered through the curtains of Ethan's small bedroom, waking him earlier than usual. He stretched his sore arms, the aches from the previous day's work still lingering in his muscles. Ethan lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the scene from yesterday. He hadn't given it much thought at the time, but helping Mr. Harris had felt good. There was something about the man's smile, the gratitude in his eyes, that stayed with him. Ethan's morning routine began as it always did. He slipped into his worn-out jeans and plain shirt, made his way to the kitchen, and grabbed the last piece of bread from the counter. Sophia was already up, her hair tied back and her cleaning uniform freshly ironed. "Good morning," she greeted him with a warm smile, though her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. "Morning, Mom," Ethan replied, chewing on the bread as he grabbed his bicycle. He was about to head out for another day of deliveries when a loud rumbling sound stopped him in his tracks. The noise was unlike anything the quiet neighborhood was used to. It wasn't the rattle of an old pickup truck or the faint hum of a motorbike. It was deeper, smoother, and growing louder. Ethan stepped outside just in time to see a sleek black limousine turn onto their narrow street. His heart skipped a beat. A limousine? Here? On their dusty road, filled with patched fences and houses in need of repair? Ethan wiped his hands on his shirt, unsure of what to make of the sight. The car slowed, its glossy exterior gleaming in the sunlight, before coming to a stop directly in front of his house. Ethan's mother appeared in the doorway, her face a mix of confusion and worry. "What on earth?" she murmured, stepping onto the porch. Ethan's stomach churned as he walked closer to the gate. He could feel the eyes of curious neighbors peeking from their windows, whispers already spreading through the tight-knit community. The back door of the limousine opened smoothly, and a well-dressed man in his late 30s stepped out. His suit was crisp, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his demeanor calm yet commanding. He adjusted his tie before looking directly at Ethan. "Good morning," the man said with a friendly smile. "Are you Ethan?" Ethan swallowed hard, glancing back at his mother for reassurance before nodding. "Yeah, that's me," he stammered. The man extended a hand. "I'm Carter," he introduced himself. "My father told me about you." "Mr. Harris? You helped him yesterday with the wood." Recognition flickered in Ethan's mind and he relaxed slightly. "Oh yeah," he said, shaking Carter's hand hesitantly. "Is he okay?" Carter's smile widened. "More than okay, thanks to you." He couldn't stop talking about the kind young man who went out of his way to help him. "It's rare to meet someone with your integrity, Ethan. My father was so impressed he asked me to come and thank you personally." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the man's sincerity. "Oh, it was nothing," he mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked like he needed help. Carter chuckled, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Well, my father believes kindness deserves recognition. This is for you, a small token of gratitude." Ethan stared at the envelope, instantly aware of what it likely contained. His hands stayed at his sides as he shook his head firmly. "No, I can't take that," he said quickly. "I didn't help him for money." Carter raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Are you sure? It's the least we can do." Sophia, who had been silently watching from the porch, stepped forward, her protective instincts kicking in. "Why are you offering my son money?" she asked, her tone sharp. Carter turned to her, his expression calm and respectful. "I understand your concern, ma'am," he said. "But this isn't charity. My father simply wanted to show his appreciation. Your son's kindness is something we don't see often." Sophia folded her arms, her gaze skeptical but thoughtful. Ethan glanced between the two adults before speaking up again. "I appreciate it, Mr. Carter, but really, I just did what anyone should do. I can't take money for that." Carter studied Ethan for a moment, his expression softening. Slowly, he returned the envelope to his pocket. "Fair enough," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. "But perhaps there's another way we can show our gratitude." Ethan tilted his head, unsure of what Carter meant. "What do you mean?" "I run a business," Carter explained. "We're always looking for hardworking, dependable people, people with character. My father believes you fit that description. If you're interested, I'd like to offer you a job." Ethan's eyes widened, and he took a small step back, trying to process the offer. A real job? Him? It felt surreal. Sophia immediately stepped closer, her voice firm. "What kind of job?" she asked, her protective tone unwavering. Carter met her gaze with steady confidence. "Nothing too complicated," he replied. "We'll teach him everything he needs to know. It's an honest job, and it could be an opportunity for him to help his family." Ethan looked at his mother, her face etched with worry. He could see the hesitation in her eyes, the fear of trusting someone who might take advantage of their situation. Yet, there was something about Carter's demeanor that felt genuine. "I don't know." Ethan began, his voice trailing off. "There's no pressure," Carter assured him, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a business card. "Think about it. If you're interested, give me a call. My father and I would be happy to have you on board." He handed the card to Ethan, who accepted it with trembling fingers. Carter offered a polite nod to both Ethan and Sophia before stepping back into the limousine. As the car drove away, leaving a trail of dust behind, Ethan stared at the card in his hand, his heart pounding. Sophia placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but cautious. "Ethan, I don't know about this. It might not be what it seems." Ethan nodded, still staring at the card. "I know, Mom. But what if it's real? What if it's a chance to make things better?" Sophia sighed, pulling him into a hug. "We'll think about it. Together. No rush, okay?" "Okay," Ethan whispered, his mind already racing with possibilities. The sun had barely risen the next day when Ethan woke up, the events of the previous morning still fresh in his mind. The business card Carter had given him sat on the small wooden table in the kitchen, its pristine white surface a stark contrast to the worn surroundings of their home. Ethan stared at it as he ate his modest breakfast, a slice of bread and a cup of watered-down tea. The weight of the decision pressed on him, heavy yet filled with possibility. Sophia watched him from across the room, her hands busy kneading dough. She hadn't said much about Carter's offer since the limousine had left, but Ethan could sense her unease. Finally, she broke the silence. "Are you sure about this, Ethan?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with concern. "It's a big step. We don't know these people, and I don't want you getting hurt." Ethan put down his cup and met her gaze. "I know, Mom," he replied, "but what if it's real? What if it's my chance to do something more, to help us?" Sophia sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "If you feel it's worth trying, I won't stop you," she said finally. "But promise me you'll be careful. Don't let anyone take advantage of you." "I promise," Ethan said firmly, though he could feel the nervous energy building in his chest. By mid-morning, Ethan had dressed in his best clothes, a faded but clean shirt and his only pair of decent jeans. Sophia helped smooth out the wrinkles as Lily bounced excitedly nearby. "Are you going to work, Ethan?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Maybe," he said with a small smile. "I'm just going to see what it's all about." Sophia walked him to the door, her expression a mix of pride and worry. "If anything feels off, you leave immediately," she instructed. "I will, Mom," Ethan assured her before stepping outside and mounting his bike. The address on the card wasn't far, but As Ethan pedaled through the familiar streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was heading into a different world. The whispers of neighbors followed him, curious glances from behind curtains and murmured conversations about the boy who had been visited by a limousine. When he arrived, the building looked out of place in their neighborhood. It was clean and well-maintained, with freshly painted walls and neatly trimmed hedges. Ethan swallowed hard, parking his bike against the fence. Carter was waiting outside, dressed more casually than the day before, his smile as warm as the sunlight. "Ethan," Carter greeted, extending a hand. "Glad you could make it." Ethan shook his hand, his nerves making his palms sweat. "Thanks for inviting me," he said, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "Come on," Carter said, motioning for Ethan to follow him inside. "I'll show you around." The interior of the building was unlike anything Ethan had seen before. The floors were tiled, and the walls were lined with framed pictures and motivational quotes. A receptionist at the front desk greeted Carter with a cheerful nod before turning her curious gaze to Ethan. They walked down a narrow hallway, passing offices filled with people typing away on computers or talking quietly on phones. Carter led him to a smaller room where a man in his late 20s was sitting at a desk, sorting through a stack of papers. "Ethan, this is Mark," Carter introduced. "Mark's been with us for years, and he'll be showing you the ropes." Mark looked up and offered a friendly grin. "Hey there, Ethan," he said, standing to shake Ethan's hand. "I hear you're here to give this a shot." "Yeah," Ethan replied, feeling a bit overwhelmed, but determined not to show it. Mark motioned to the chair beside his desk. "Have a seat," he said. "We'll start with something simple." As Ethan settled into the chair, Mark handed him a small stack of documents. "Your first task is to sort these by date," he explained. "Nothing too complicated. Just take your time and make sure everything's in the right order." Ethan nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he took the papers. He hadn't done anything like this before, but he was eager to prove himself. Carefully, he began sorting through the stack, his eyes scanning each date and organizing the papers into neat piles. Mark watched him for a moment before giving an encouraging nod. "You're doing great," he said. "It might seem small, but it's an important part of what we do here." The words gave Ethan a small boost of confidence, and he continued working with more focus. By the time he finished, his nerves had settled, and he felt a sense of accomplishment. "Good job," Mark said, inspecting the sorted papers. "You're a quick learner." Carter appeared in the doorway, his arms crossed and a smile on his face. "How's it going?" he asked. Mark gave him a thumbs up. "Ethan's got a good head on his shoulders," he said. "I think he'll fit in just fine." Ethan felt his cheeks flush at the compliment. "Thanks," he said quietly, unsure of how to respond to the praise. Carter clapped him on the shoulder. "Keep up the good work, Ethan," he said. "We've got plenty more to teach you." As the day went on, Ethan continued to learn the basics of the job, from sorting paperwork to observing how Mark used the computer system to log information. It was a lot to take in, and by the time lunch rolled around, Ethan's head was spinning. Mark invited him to join the team in the break room, where a few employees were chatting and eating sandwiches. Carter handed Ethan one as they sat down at a table. "Eat up," Carter said. "You'll need the energy." The sandwich was simple: bread, meat, and cheese. However, to Ethan, it tasted like a luxury item. He listened as Mark and Carter talked about the business, occasionally chiming in with questions. By the time the day ended, Ethan was exhausted but felt a strange sense of pride. He had stepped into a world completely foreign to him and hadn't crumbled under the pressure. As he left the building, Carter walked him to the door. "You did great today, Ethan," he said. "If you're willing to come back tomorrow, we'd be happy to have you." Ethan nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and determination. "I'll be here," he promised. He climbed onto his bike and began the ride home, the setting sun casting long shadows over the streets. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he was heading towards something better. A future he could be proud of. The next day dawned bright and early, and Ethan was out of bed before the sun had fully risen. His excitement from the previous day lingered, but it was now tinged with the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about learning something new. It was about proving that he deserved to be there. Sophia watched him from the kitchen as he prepared to leave. She said little, but Ethan could feel her silent prayers, her hope that this opportunity would be the start of something better. "Good luck today, Ethan," she finally said as he stood by the door. "Thanks, Mom," he replied, smiling as he grabbed his bag and headed out. The ride to the office felt shorter this time, and the streets were less intimidating. When Ethan arrived, Mark was already waiting at his desk, sifting through another stack of papers. "Morning, Ethan," Mark greeted with a grin. "Ready to tackle more paperwork?" Ethan nodded, dropping his bag beside the chair. "Yeah, I'm ready." Mark handed him a new task, explaining how to cross-check delivery records against invoices. It was more detailed than the previous day's work, but Ethan approached it with determination, his hands steady as he sorted through the documents. The morning passed quickly, with Ethan growing more confident in the process. By mid-afternoon he had settled into a rhythm, his focus sharpening with each completed stack. But just as things seemed to be going smoothly, the atmosphere in the office shifted. A man burst through the door, his face flushed with anger. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clearly upset. His voice boomed across the room as he demanded to speak with someone in charge. "I want an explanation," the man shouted, waving a crumpled paper in his hand. "How does a company like this send my shipment to the wrong address? This is unacceptable." Ethan froze, his hands gripping the edges of the desk. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment he wasn't sure what to do. Mark rose from his chair, calm but firm. "Sir, please take a seat," he said. "We'll sort this out right away." The man glared at him, his frustration unabated. "I've already wasted half my day because of this mistake. Do you know how much this delay is costing me?" Ethan glanced at Carter, who had just entered the room. Despite the chaos, Carter's expression remained composed. He exchanged a quick look with Ethan before addressing him directly. "Ethan," Carter said, his tone steady, "can you grab the records from last week's shipments? They're in the cabinet near Mark's desk." Ethan nodded, snapping out of his stupor. He moved quickly to the cabinet, his hands shaking slightly as he rifled through the files. He found the stack labeled last week and pulled it out, scanning the dates to ensure he had the correct set. As he handed the records to Carter, the man's piercing gaze shifted to him. "Who's this kid?" the man barked, his voice still loud but now tinged with incredulity. "He's part of our team," Carter replied evenly, taking the files from Ethan and flipping through them. "And he's helping us get this sorted." Ethan stepped back, his heart pounding as Carter began calmly explaining the situation to the man. Carter pointed out a small error in the address entry and offered a solution to ensure the shipment would be corrected immediately. As the conversation continued, Ethan watched in awe. Carter's tone never wavered, his patience unshaken despite the man's aggression. By the end of the discussion, the man's anger had diminished, replaced by reluctant acceptance. "Fine," the man grumbled, tucking the corrected paperwork under his arm. "Just make sure it doesn't happen again." Carter nodded politely. "You have my word. Thank you for bringing this to our attention." When the man finally left, the room let out a collective sigh of relief. Mark turned to Ethan, giving him a reassuring nod. "Good job getting those files, Ethan," Mark said. "It's not easy to stay calm in situations like that." Ethan felt a small swell of pride but shrugged it off. "I just grabbed the records," he said modestly. "You did exactly what needed to be done," Carter chimed in, his gaze steady. "Staying focused under pressure is a skill, Ethan. You handled it well." The words stayed with Ethan as he returned to his desk. The incident had been nerve-wracking, but it also showed him the importance of teamwork and composure. It wasn't just about paperwork or records. It was about solving problems and supporting each other when things went wrong. For the rest of the day, Ethan worked with renewed determination. The experience had shaken him, but it had also made him realize the value of what he was learning. When the clock finally signaled the end of the day, Ethan gathered his things and made his way to the front of the office, where Carter was waiting to see him off. "Today wasn't easy," Carter said, leaning against the doorframe, "but you rose to the occasion. That's what matters." Ethan nodded, his confidence bolstered by the praise. "Thanks, Mr. Carter. I'll do better tomorrow." "You're already doing great, Ethan," Carter replied with a smile. "Keep it up." As Ethan rode home, the evening breeze brushing against his face, he replayed the events of the day in his mind. It had been challenging, yes, but it had also been rewarding. He had faced something he never thought he could handle and come out stronger on the other side. When he arrived home, Sophia was waiting for him at the gate. Her eyes scanned his face, searching for signs of how the day had gone. "How was it?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Ethan smiled, the exhaustion clear in his eyes, but mixed with satisfaction. "It was tough," he admitted, "but I learned a lot. And I think I'm getting better." Sophia's face softened, her pride evident as she pulled him into a hug. "I'm proud of you, Ethan," she whispered. "You're doing something amazing." As the sun set over their small home, Ethan felt a newfound resolve settle in his heart. He wasn't just working for himself, he was working for his family for a better future. And for the first time, he truly believed he could make it happen. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. His muscles still ached from the previous day, but the feeling wasn't unwelcome. It was a reminder of the progress he was making, of the challenges he was overcoming. As he prepared to leave, Sophia stood by the doorway, her expression softer than usual. "You've been working so hard, Ethan," she said, handing him a small piece of bread wrapped in paper. "I just want you to know how proud I am." "Thanks, Mom," Ethan said with a small smile, taking the bread and tucking it into his bag. "I'll do my best." The ride to the office felt familiar now, almost comfortable. Ethan noticed how the streets seemed less daunting, and the whispers of neighbors were less pressing. He wasn't just the boy delivering newspapers anymore, he was part of something bigger. When he arrived, Mark greeted him with a friendly wave. "Morning, Ethan. Ready for more?" "Always," Ethan replied, his confidence growing with each passing day. Mark handed him a new stack of documents and a checklist. "Today, we're stepping things up," he explained. "You're going to cross-check these records against what's in the system. It's a little more detailed, but I think you're ready for it." Ethan nodded, setting the papers on his desk. "Got it. I'll give it my best shot." As he worked, Ethan found himself slipping into a rhythm. The clack of keyboards and the oft hum of conversations in the office created a backdrop of productivity that was both calming and motivating. Each paper he reviewed felt like a small victory, a step closer to mastering the tasks he'd been given. Mark checked in periodically, offering guidance when Ethan hesitated. "Take your time," he said, leaning over to point at a section of the document. "It's better to double-check than rush through it." Ethan nodded, grateful for Mark's patience. "Thanks," he said, adjusting the paper in his hands. By mid-morning, Ethan had completed the first set of records. He stacked them neatly and brought them to Mark, who gave them a quick glance. "Nice work," Mark said with a nod of approval. "You're getting the hang of this." Ethan felt a spark of pride, his confidence building with each word of encouragement. "Thanks, Mark. It's starting to make sense now." Around lunchtime, Carter joined them in the break room, carrying a box of sandwiches. He handed one to Ethan with a smile. "You've earned this," Carter said. "Thanks," Ethan replied, unwrapping the sandwich carefully. It was a simple gesture, but it made him feel like part of the team. As they ate, Carter leaned back in his chair, his tone conversational. "So, Ethan," he began, "how are you finding everything so far?" "It's good," Ethan said, pausing to choose his words. "I mean, it's a lot to learn, but I like it." "It feels important," Carter nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's because it is important. Every detail, no matter how small, contributes to the bigger picture. And you're doing a great job." Ethan smiled, his cheeks flushing slightly. "Thanks. I just don't want to mess anything up." "You won't," Carter assured him. "Mistakes happen, but it's how you handle them that counts." After lunch, Ethan returned to his desk with renewed determination. The next stack of documents was larger and more complicated, but he approached it with the same focus and care as before. As the hours passed, Ethan found himself gaining confidence in his abilities. The once daunting tasks were becoming second nature, and he no longer felt the same hesitation that had gripped him on his first day. Mark noticed the change and gave Ethan a thumbs up from across the room. "You're a natural," he said, grinning. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "I don't know about that, but thanks." By the end of the day, Ethan had completed all his assigned tasks and even helped Mark with some additional work. Carter stopped by to check on their progress, his expression one of genuine pride. "Ethan," Carter said, clapping him on the shoulder, "you've done excellent work today. Keep this up and you'll go far." "Thanks, Mr. Carter," Ethan replied, his voice steady but humble. As Ethan rode home that evening, the weight of the day felt lighter than it had before. He was beginning to believe in himself, to see that he was capable of more than he'd ever imagined. When he arrived home, Lily ran to greet him at the gate. "Ethan, how was work?" she asked, her eyes shining with excitement. "It was good," Ethan said, kneeling down to ruffle her hair. "I'm learning a lot." Sophia stood nearby, her arms crossed but her expression warm. "You look different," she said, studying him closely. "More confident." Ethan smiled, feeling a swell of gratitude for his family's support. "I guess I am," he admitted. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Ethan thought about the journey he'd started. It wasn't easy, and there was still so much to learn, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. Ethan woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose that was becoming increasingly familiar. The past few days had been challenging, but they had also been rewarding in ways he hadn't anticipated. Every small victory, whether it was finishing a task or earning a word of praise, felt like a step toward something greater. Sophia handed him a piece of bread as he prepared to leave. "You're doing well, Ethan," she said softly, her voice filled with pride. "Just remember to take things one day at a time." "I will, Mom," he promised, smiling before stepping out into the cool morning air. The office was already buzzing with activity when Ethan arrived. Mark was at his desk, poring over a thick stack of invoices, and Carter stood by the doorway, speaking with one of the senior employees. Ethan greeted them both with a nod before settling into his usual spot. "Morning, Ethan," Mark said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Today's going to be a bit more intense. Ready for a challenge?" "Always," Ethan replied, his confidence growing with each passing day. Mark explained the task of cross-referencing client orders with shipping records to ensure that everything matched. It was detail-oriented and required focus, but Ethan felt prepared. As he worked, the hours seemed to fly by. The rhythm of typing, sorting, and checking felt almost meditative. Ethan's hands moved more confidently across the papers and keyboard, and the once daunting tasks now felt manageable. But just as the afternoon began to settle into a steady pace, a commotion broke out in the main office. A customer, clearly frustrated, had entered the building, his voice cutting through the usual hum of work. "I've been waiting for an answer for days," the man shouted, waving a piece of paper in the air. "I need this sorted, and I need it sorted now." Ethan froze for a moment, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The tension in the room was palpable, and he could feel his heartbeat quicken. Carter was the first to respond, stepping forward with his usual calm demeanor. "Sir, I understand your frustration," he said. "Let's take a look and see how we can resolve this." The man wasn't easily appeased. His voice remained loud and sharp as he explained the issue, a delayed shipment that had caused a significant inconvenience. "Mark," Carter said, turning to his colleague, "can you grab the original order forms?" Then, his eyes landed on Ethan. "Ethan, I'll need the updated shipping logs from last week. They're in the second cabinet on the right." Ethan nodded, his nervousness fading into determination. He moved quickly, finding the files Carter had mentioned and bringing them to him. Carter accepted them with a nod of thanks before turning back to the customer. "Here's what we're going to do," Carter began, his voice steady and reassuring. He walked the customer through the issue, pointing out where the error had occurred and outlining the steps they would take to fix it. Ethan watched in awe as Carter handled the situation with professionalism and patience. The man's anger gradually subsided, replaced by reluctant understanding. By the time the conversation ended, the tension in the room had lifted. As the customer left, Mark let out a low whistle. "That was something," he said, turning to Ethan. "Good job finding those logs so quickly. You kept your cool under pressure." Ethan shrugged, though he couldn't hide the small smile tugging at his lips. "I just did what Mr. Carter asked," he said modestly. "You did exactly what was needed," Carter chimed in, his gaze steady. "And that's what matters." The words stayed with Ethan for the rest of the day. He had been part of the solution. However small his role might have been, it felt good to contribute. By the time the office quieted down, Ethan had completed his tasks for the day and even helped Mark finish a few additional projects. As he prepared to leave, Carter stopped him by the door. "Ethan," he said, You handled yourself well today. Keep this up, and I can see you moving up quickly. Ethan felt a rush of pride but kept his tone humble. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I'll keep working hard. I don't doubt it, Carter replied with a smile. On the ride home, Ethan couldn't stop replaying the events of the day in his mind. It had been overwhelming at times, but it had also shown him how far he'd come in such a short period. When he arrived home, Lily was waiting for him as usual, her eyes wide with excitement. Ethan, did anything exciting happen today? You could say that, Ethan said with a laugh, kneeling to meet her gaze. I helped fix a problem at work. Wow, Lily said, her admiration evident. You're so cool, Ethan. Sophia stood nearby, her expression soft but thoughtful. You're learning a lot, aren't you? She said as Ethan stood up. Yeah, Ethan admitted, his tone sincere. It's not easy, but I feel like I'm getting better every day. Sophia's smile widened and she reached out to pull him into a hug. I'm proud of you, she whispered. As night fell, Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The day's events played in his mind like a film reel, and he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of confidence. He was starting to see his potential, not just as an employee, but as someone who could make a real difference. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like he was more than just surviving. He was thriving. The following week brought new challenges for Ethan and new opportunities to prove himself. Every day, he arrived at the office earlier than required, determined to stay ahead of his tasks. Each piece of paperwork, each detail checked, felt like another step forward. Mark noticed Ethan's dedication and began to entrust him with more responsibility. You're ready for something bigger, he said one morning, handing Ethan a clipboard filled with notes. Ethan took the clipboard, scanning the information. What's this? Bookmark, go back. These are client profiles, Mark explained. We need to categorize them based on priority and match them with the right shipping schedules. It's more complex than what you've been doing, but I think you're ready. Ethan nodded, though the weight of the task made his heart race. I'll do my best, he promised. Just remember, Mark added, it's okay to ask questions. No one expects you to know everything right away. Ethan smiled, reassured by Mark's encouragement. He settled into his desk and began working through the profiles, his brow furrowed in concentration. The process was slow at first. Some profiles were straightforward, but others were packed with confusing details. Ethan felt the familiar knot of doubt tighten in his chest as he struggled to make sense of a particularly complicated set of instructions. Having trouble? Mark asked, appearing at his side. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. This one's a mess, he admitted, showing Mark the notes. I can't figure out what they want. Mark leaned over, scanning the document. Ah, I see what happened, he said, pointing to a section Ethan had overlooked. They mixed up the product codes. It's an easy fix. Just match this part here with the shipping column. Ethan let out a relieved breath and smiled. Thanks, Mark. I didn't even notice that. You're learning, Mark said with a grin. It's all part of the process. With Mark's guidance, Ethan tackled the rest of the profiles with renewed focus. The task, which had seemed overwhelming at first, began to feel manageable. By the time lunch rolled around, Ethan had finished organizing the profiles and submitted them to Mark for review. Nice work, Mark said, after flipping through the pages. You're getting faster and your attention to detail is improving. Thanks, Ethan said, his cheeks flushing with pride. Carter joined them in the break room, carrying his usual sandwich and coffee. He pulled up a chair beside Ethan and leaned back, studying him with an appraising look. Mark tells me you've been doing great, Carter said. Ethan shrugged, trying to downplay the praise. I'm just trying to keep up. You're doing more than that, Carter replied. You've got the right attitude, Ethan. That's not something we can teach. The words stayed with Ethan as they ate. It wasn't often that someone outside his family acknowledged his efforts, and the validation meant more than he could express. The afternoon brought another unexpected challenge. A last-minute shipment required immediate coordination, and the team was scrambling to adjust schedules and confirm details. Ethan, Carter said, motioning him over, I need you to help Mark double-check these routes. It's time-sensitive, so stay focused. Ethan nodded, adrenaline surging through him as he took the stack of papers from Carter. The office buzzed with activity, phones ringing, and voices overlapping as the team worked to resolve the issue. At first, The chaos was overwhelming, but Ethan forced himself to stay calm. He reviewed the routes, comparing them to the updated schedules and marking discrepancies. When Mark checked his progress, he gave Ethan a quick nod of approval. "Keep going," Mark said. "You're doing great." By the end of the day, the shipment issue had been resolved, and Carter gathered the team for a brief meeting. "Good job, everyone," Carter said, his tone warm but professional. "Today could have been a disaster, but we pulled through because of teamwork. And Ethan," he added, turning to him, "you handled your part exceptionally well." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the direct praise. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the flutter in his chest. As Ethan rode home that evening, he couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short time. He had gone from feeling like an outsider to being an integral part of the team. Lily was waiting for him at the gate, her face lighting up as he approached. "Ethan, did you save the day again?" she asked playfully. "Something like that," Ethan said with a laugh, scooping her up into a hug. Sophia stood nearby, her arms crossed but her expression soft. "You've been working late a lot," she said. "Are they treating you well?" "They are," Ethan said, setting Lily down. "It's hard work, but it's worth it. I feel like I'm finally doing something that matters." Sophia's eyes glistened, and she pulled him into a hug. "You've always mattered, Ethan," she said softly. "But I'm glad you're starting to see it for yourself." That night, Ethan lay in bed, his mind replaying the day's events. He thought about the praise from Carter, the support from Mark, and the way he had pushed himself beyond what he thought he was capable of. For the first time, Ethan truly believed he could achieve something greater. The barriers that once seemed insurmountable were beginning to crumble, replaced by a growing confidence in his abilities. As he drifted off to sleep, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. This was just the beginning, but it was enough to give him hope for the future. By now, Ethan had settled into a routine at the office. Each morning he arrived early, eager to start the day. The once daunting tasks of paperwork and data entry now felt second nature, and he approached every assignment with confidence. Mark had taken note of Ethan's progress. "You've come a long way," he said one morning as Ethan submitted another completed stack of documents. "I think it's time we gave you something with a little more weight." "What kind of weight?" Ethan asked, his curiosity piqued. Mark handed him a folder filled with detailed spreadsheets and handwritten notes. "We're working on streamlining client communications," he explained. "Your job will be to organize this data, look for patterns, and create a report we can use to make recommendations." Ethan's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. "This looks complicated," he admitted. "It is," Mark said with a grin. "But you've got the skills. Take your time, and don't hesitate to ask for help." Ethan nodded, his nerves battling with a sense of determination. "I'll give it my best," he promised. Back at his desk, Ethan dove into the folder. The data was dense, a mixture of numbers, dates, and customer feedback that seemed to blur together. He grabbed a notepad and began jotting down key points, trying to find a system to make sense of it all. The hours ticked by, and Ethan remained focused. Occasionally, Mark or Carter would pass by, offering words of encouragement or answering a question. "You're tackling this like a pro," Carter said at one point, glancing over Ethan's shoulder. "How's it coming along?" "It's starting to make sense," Ethan replied, though his brow furrowed slightly. "Some of the feedback doesn't match the numbers, though." "That's exactly the kind of detail we need to know," Carter said, giving him an approving nod. "Keep digging. You're on the right track." By the time lunch rolled around, Ethan had organized a significant portion of the data and identified several inconsistencies. He joined the team in the break room, his appetite fueled by a sense of accomplishment. After lunch, Carter called Ethan into his office, a space Ethan hadn't yet entered. It was larger than he expected, with bookshelves lining the walls and a sleek desk covered in neatly stacked papers. "Take a seat," Carter said, motioning to a chair across from him. Ethan sat, his hands resting nervously in his lap. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "Quite the opposite," Carter replied with a smile. "I wanted to talk to you about your progress. You've been doing excellent work, and Mark and I both agree that you're ready for more responsibility." Ethan blinked, his heart skipping a beat. "More responsibility?" Carter nodded, leaning forward. "You've proven you can handle the basics, but I think you're capable of more. We'd like to involve you in some of the team's planning sessions to let you see the bigger picture of how everything works. Ethan's mind raced. The idea of sitting in on planning sessions felt overwhelming but also exciting. It was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to contribute in a meaningful way. I'd love that, he said finally, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. Good, Carter said, leaning back in his chair. You'll start tomorrow. Just remember, you don't have to know everything. This is about learning and observing. Ask questions and don't be afraid to speak up if you have ideas. The next day, Ethan found himself in the team's conference room for the first time. The space was bright and open, with a large table at the center surrounded by chairs. Carter, Mark, and a few other team members were already seated, discussing the week's priorities. Ethan, come on in, Carter said, waving him over. Ethan sat near Mark, his notepad ready. As the meeting began, he listened intently, his pen moving quickly as he jotted down notes. The conversation covered everything from client satisfaction to logistical challenges, and Ethan marveled at how much coordination went into the company's operations. At one point, Carter turned to Ethan. Do you have any thoughts on how we can improve these delivery schedules? Ethan hesitated, caught off guard by the question. He glanced at his notes, his mind racing. Well, he began tentatively, I noticed that some of the delays seem to happen with the same clients. Maybe we could prioritize those routes or find out what's causing the holdups. Carter nodded thoughtfully. That's a good observation. Mark, can you follow up on that with Ethan later? Sure thing, Mark replied with a grin. Ethan's chest swelled with pride as the meeting continued. It wasn't just that his input had been valued, it was that he felt like he belonged. By the end of the day, Ethan had worked with Mark to refine his observations into actionable steps. The process was challenging, but it reinforced how much he had learned in such a short time. As he left the office, Carter stopped him by the door. You did great today, Ethan, he said. You're starting to think like a problem solver. And that's exactly what we need. Thanks, Mr. Carter, Ethan said, his voice filled with gratitude. The ride home was peaceful, and the evening air was cool against Ethan's face. He thought about how far he'd come since that first nervous day. The boy who had hesitated to help Mr. Harris now felt like someone capable of tackling real challenges. When he arrived home, Lily greeted him with her usual excitement, and Sophia gave him a knowing smile. Another good day? She asked. Yeah, Ethan replied, setting down his bag. I think I'm starting to get the hang of this. Sophia hugged him tightly. You've always been capable, Ethan. Now you're starting to see it too. As Ethan lay in bed that night, his thoughts were filled with possibility. He wasn't just growing into his role, he was growing into himself. And for the first time, he felt ready for whatever came next. Ethan woke up the next morning with a mix of excitement and nervousness. His role at the company had been steadily growing, and while he felt proud of how far he'd come, the weight of new responsibilities was undeniable. Today, he would be tackling some of the most challenging tasks yet, and he was determined not to let anyone down. Sophia watched him as he prepared for the day, her eyes full of quiet pride. Don't push yourself too hard, Ethan, she said, handing him a piece of toast. You're already doing more than enough. Ethan smiled as he took the toast, his voice calm but determined. I'll be fine, Mom. I just want to keep getting better. The ride to the office felt different this morning. The streets were busier, the air buzzing with activity. As Ethan pedaled, he couldn't help but think back to the first day he had walked into the office, unsure of himself and his place in this new world. Now, he felt like he belonged, though he knew there was still much to learn. When Ethan arrived, Carter greeted him at the door, his expression unusually serious. Morning, Ethan, Carter said, motioning him inside. We've got a bit of a situation today. What kind of situation? Ethan asked, his pulse quickening. One of our major clients is requesting a full review of their account, Carter explained as they walked toward the conference room. They want to see every detail, every shipment, every invoice, every timeline. It's a tall order, and it has to be done by the end of the day. Ethan's stomach flipped. That sounds intense, he admitted. It is, Carter replied, his tone steady. But I think you're ready to help with this. Mark will guide you through it, but I need you to handle a good portion of the data review. Can you do that? Ethan took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. I'll do my best. In the conference room, Mark was already sifting through stacks of papers and spreadsheets, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as Ethan entered and gave him a quick smile. Glad you're here, Ethan, Mark said, sliding a folder across the table. This is your section. We need to cross-check these shipping records with the client's payment history. Look for any discrepancies, no matter how small. Ethan nodded, his hand steady as he opened the folder. Got it. Let's do this. The hours that followed were a blur of numbers, notes, and double-checking details. Ethan worked methodically, his eyes scanning each page for inconsistencies. The pressure in the room was palpable, but he focused on the task at hand, determined not to let the weight of the situation overwhelm him. At one point, Mark leaned over to check Ethan's progress. How's it going? He asked. I think I've found a couple of issues, Ethan replied, pointing to a set of mismatched dates on the records. Mark examined the documents and nodded. Good catch. That would have slipped past most people. Ethan felt a surge of pride, but quickly returned to his work. There was still so much to do, and time was ticking. As the afternoon wore on, the team worked in near silence, the only sounds being the shuffle of papers and the occasional murmur of discussion. Ethan could feel the strain, his mind growing tired from the relentless attention to detail. But just as doubt began to creep in, Carter entered the room and addressed the team. I know this is a lot, he said, his voice steady but encouraging, but you're all doing an incredible job. Keep pushing. We're almost there. The words were a small but powerful reminder of why they were working so hard. Ethan straightened in his chair, his determination renewed. By early evening, the review was nearly complete. Ethan and Mark went over the final documents together, ensuring every detail was accurate. This looks solid, Mark said, tapping the edge of the folder. Great work, Ethan. You really stepped up today. Ethan smiled, exhaustion evident in his eyes but pride shining through. Thanks, Mark. I'm just glad I could help. When the team presented the completed review to Carter, his face lit up with approval. This is exactly what we needed, he said, flipping through the pages. You've all done outstanding work, especially you, Ethan. Ethan's cheeks flushed at the praise. I just followed what Mark showed me, he said modestly. You did more than that, Carter replied. You showed initiative and focus. That's what makes the difference. As Ethan left the office that evening, the weight of the day's work felt different, not a burden but a reminder of what he was capable of achieving. The setting sun bathed the streets in a warm glow as he rode home, his thoughts filled with a mix of pride and relief. When he arrived, Lily was waiting at the gate, her eyes bright with curiosity. Did you do something amazing today? She asked, skipping alongside him as he walked his bike to the porch. Something like that, Ethan said with a grin. Sophia met him at the door, her expression soft but knowing. You've been working so hard, she said, brushing a stray hair from his forehead. How do you feel? Good, Ethan replied honestly. Tired but good. We had a tough day, but we got through it. Sophia smiled, her pride evident. That's what matters, Ethan. You're proving to yourself and to everyone else just how capable you are. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, his mind replayed the events of the day. The challenges, the pressure, the teamwork, it had all been worth it. He had grown in ways he hadn't thought possible, and he was starting to see a future he could believe in. For the first time, the unknown didn't feel so daunting. It felt like an opportunity waiting to be seized. The morning air was crisp as Ethan pedaled toward the office, the golden glow of the rising sun lighting his path. His mind was clear, yet filled with possibilities. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of challenges and growth, and Ethan felt himself changing with each passing day. This morning, Carter had asked for a meeting with him. Ethan didn't know what to expect, but he wasn't nervous, just curious. When he arrived, the office was buzzing as usual. Mark greeted him with a friendly wave, and Ethan noticed a few other colleagues giving him approving nods. It was strange, but also heartening, to feel like he was truly part of the team. Carter's office door was slightly ajar, and he called Ethan in with his usual warm tone. Come in, Ethan, he said, motioning to the chair across from his desk. Ethan sat down, his hands resting on his knees. You wanted to see me, Mr. Carter? Carter smiled and leaned forward, clasping his hands together. I did. I wanted to talk to you about how far you've come since you joined us. Ethan tilted his head slightly, unsure where the conversation was heading. When you first started, Carter continued, you were hesitant, unsure of yourself, and that's completely normal. But over the past few weeks, you've shown remarkable growth. You've tackled challenges, worked through pressure, and become someone the team can rely on. Ethan felt his cheeks flush, but he held Carter's gaze. Thank you, he said, his voice steady. I'm not just saying this to flatter you, Carter added. I've been thinking about what's next for you here. You've proven you can handle more responsibility, and I want to help you keep growing. What do you mean? Ethan asked, his curiosity piqued. I'd like to formally expand your role, Carter said. You'll still be working with Mark, but I want you to start taking on small leadership tasks, training newer employees, contributing to team strategies, and even presenting your own ideas in meetings. Ethan's eyes widened. Leadership? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Carter nodded. I know it sounds like a big step, but I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't think you were ready. You've got a natural ability to see problems clearly and work through them. Those are skills that can take you far. Ethan sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The idea of stepping into a leadership role was both thrilling and intimidating, but Carter's confidence in him was undeniable. I'll do it, Ethan said after a moment, his voice filled with quiet determination. I want to keep learning and contributing. Carter's smile widened. That's what I like to hear. We'll start small and build from there. And remember, you're not alone. We're here to support you every step of the way. That day, Ethan joined Mark in reviewing onboarding materials for a new hire. It was a simple task, but it marked the beginning of Ethan's journey into leadership. Here's the thing about training, Mark said as they worked. It's not just about teaching someone the job. It's about helping them feel confident, like they belong here. Ethan nodded, taking in Mark's words. I'll try to remember that, he said. Later, Ethan sat in on a planning meeting with Carter and a few senior employees. The topics were complex, ranging from logistical challenges to client retention strategies, but Ethan listened intently, jotting down notes and absorbing as much as he could. When Carter asked for his input on a scheduling issue, Ethan hesitated briefly before offering a suggestion. What if we reorganize the routes to focus on the clients with the highest priority first, he said. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Carter nodded. That's a good idea, he said. Let's explore that further. Ethan felt a spark of pride, knowing his contributions were valued. As the day ended, Ethan walked out of the office feeling lighter, his thoughts swirling with everything he had experienced. He thought about how much had changed since the day he helped Mr. Harris with those wooden planks. What had started as a simple act of kindness had blossomed into an opportunity that reshaped his life. When Ethan arrived home, Lily was waiting as always, her smile lighting up the porch. Ethan, did anything exciting happen today? She asked eagerly. Ethan laughed, scooping her into a hug. Every day is exciting now, he said. Sophia appeared in the doorway, her expression warm but curious. You're smiling more lately, she said as Ethan set Lily down. I take it things are going well? Ethan nodded, his eyes meeting hers. Better than I ever expected, he said. I'm learning so much, and I feel different, like I'm finally doing something that matters. Sophia pulled him into a tight embrace. You've always mattered, Ethan, she said softly. But I'm so glad you're starting to see it for yourself. That night, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the small desk where he kept a few mementos. A newspaper from his delivery days, the business card Carter had given him, and a framed photo of his family. He thought about everything he had accomplished and everything he still wanted to achieve. The road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with challenges, but for the first time in his life, Ethan felt ready to face them. He wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore. He was building a future, not just for himself, but for his family. The boy who once doubted his abilities was now a young man with a vision, a purpose, and the determination to make it all come true. As Ethan lay back and closed his eyes, he smiled. The future was still uncertain, but it no longer felt scary. It felt like a world of possibilities waiting for him to step into it. Ethan's story is a beautiful reminder of how small acts of kindness can lead to life-changing opportunities. It all started with a simple gesture, helping an elderly man in need. And from there, a journey of growth, perseverance, and self-discovery unfolded. Through his hard work and determination, Ethan proved that no matter where you begin, you can rise above challenges and create a brighter future. This tale isn't just about achieving success, it's about the power of kindness and believing in yourself. Ethan's courage to step out of his comfort zone and his willingness to learn made all the difference, not only for himself, but for the people around him. It's a story that shows us how compassion and effort can open doors we never even knew existed. What makes this story truly inspiring is its relatability. Many of us start out unsure, wondering if we have what it takes to succeed. But like Ethan, if we stay determined and embrace the opportunities that come our way, we can grow in ways we never imagined. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Did it inspire you? Let us know how it resonated with you. If you thought the story was good, comment with a 1. If you thought it was amazing, comment with a 2. And don't stop there. Tell us your own stories of overcoming challenges or helping others. Your experiences matter, and we'd love to hear them. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more meaningful stories like this one. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Together, we can celebrate the power of resilience, kindness, and the courage to chase a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and we can't wait to share more inspiring journeys with you.